not sure that it's important that everybody write, but it's important that everybody who wants to write writes. I would say give yourself permission to write badly. One of the great things about little kids, about being a little kid, is that they don't really care whether they do it well or not.
Win all in, play my cards right. Up the ante, one blackjack all night. Roll the dice, let it ride. Water the odds, I got snake.
In case you haven't noticed, we love podcasts. In fact, we love building podcasts, everything from development to production. Because of all that, we're building a one-of-a-kind podcast network. If you have a podcast or looking to launch a new podcast, then we should talk. You can message me on Twitter at Eric_Kaz or hit us up any way that works for you. Let's talk about your podcast joining this one-of-a-kind podcast network. When you write, I guess this is a real basic question. When you write your first draft, are you writing on a computer? Are you using pen and paper, number 2 pencils? How do you typically write?
Computer.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't use like Scrivener or anything fancy like that either. I use one of the free knockoffs from Microsoft Word.
Okay. And that gets it done for you.
Yeah.
Are you taking notes elsewhere or are you putting everything on your word processor? Do you have like composition notebooks where you're coming up with ideas and thoughts and lines, or is it all on the computer?
The only time that I'll write notes somewhere other than my computer is if I get an idea when I don't have my computer available.
Okay.
Then I'll write it down wherever I can. Some of my notes are graphic. I mean, they're pictures, graphic in that sense.
Yeah, I get it. I got it.
I draw maps and floor plans and diagrams and things like that. Those go in notebooks.
Got it. Yeah, it's funny when you said graphic that you could take that word and we could think of something graphic, something violent, right?
Right.
It could go in many directions. And that's why we need writers to explain things. But things could be misinterpreted very quickly.
Yeah.
So, all right. We've connected many years ago because of editing. And we've talked a lot about all writers need editors. And it turns out that some editors, not turns out, they actually are, many editors are also writers.
Mm-hmm.
So as a writer, and you've told me about this, that you have your own editors. What's been your experience in working with editors, understanding you might create a piece, whether it's a short story, a novel, what have you, a paragraph, chapter, and the editor comes back and has some, editors, as we know, as I've come to learn, are very honest and provide feedback. And that's most important, to have someone who provides that honest feedback. But as one who's both a writer and an editor, what was your experience on the writing side in working with an editor?
Well, I was a writer first. I was on the writer end of the equation before I was on the editor end. And
yeah,
it's difficult at times, but when I trust the editor I'm working with, and I've learned that's important, except for something really basic like proofreading or something, I only work with people I like and can trust. So that when someone tells me, as one of my editors did once, is this book supposed to have a plot? She really said that. It's like, yes, doesn't it? So you kind of laugh and fix a problem or find out how to fix a problem. I learned a long time ago that my writing isn't me. So if somebody tells me you need to fix this, they're not criticizing me, they're helping me. And I take it as such, most of the time. I mean, if I'm having a bad day or whatever, that.
Sure.
But that's why I don't talk to my editors in person while they're, so if I can, how dare you? They don't know.
Yeah. No, that's great. There's 3 things that you just touched on there. I'm going to start with one of the last ones. You said, my writing is not me.
Mm-hmm.
And, you and I have talked about, because we've seen people that, and even including myself in this, we write something, you edit, you make comments, something along the lines of, does this have a point? I just spent 3 hours with this, Caroline. What are you talking about? Does this have a point? This is the biggest point I've ever raised. And you're questioning my entire existence right now. And how dare you? And people get upset about it because writing can be very personal. It's like, I'm writing this and I'm planning on sending this out into this universe, and people are going to critique it, whether they tell me about it or not. And here you are telling me that you got to start over. And that line you just used of "my writing is not me" is that is huge, because I think it's important for so many people to realize that they're not attacking you, even though there could be some days like you just talked about that you're having that day. You're like, anything that's said, I'm taking personal today. Okay. Yeah. When did you learn that? And I'm going to go back to some of the other things you said. But when did you learn? Because I think you just said that. Eventually you figured that out. Like, my writing is not me. They're not attacking me as an individual. They're trying to help me actually become a better writer, to make this piece the better piece that it needs to be.
I knew it before I really started writing much. And it was more of a process of realizing it. Like, okay, I know a lot of people get upset here, and I kind of get upset a little bit, but not that much. So why not? And then I realized, oh, I have this belief my writing isn't me, and that's correct. And that's important to know. And I think where I got it, two things. One, this may sound a little bit whatever, and I don't mean it that way, but I was told frequently growing up that I was gifted. And where I went with that is, it's a gift. It doesn't come from me. It comes from somewhere, something beyond, So if somebody gave me a nice sweater, so I put the sweater on, and somebody says, "Oh, that's a nice sweater." And I might say, "Oh, thank you. My mom gave it to me." Okay. But if somebody says, "That sweater's got a hole in it," I'd say, "Oh, thanks. I got to get that fixed." I wouldn't say, "I've got a hole in me." No, there's a hole in the sweater somebody gave to me, so it's up to me to fix it. So I kind of started out with that attitude. And then when I was middle school age, 11, 12, 13, I was working with this wonderful teacher. I told you about her a little bit, Elizabeth Curtis. And she treated me like a professional. She would mark up my paper with all of this red ink, and my spelling was atrocious in those days, and my handwriting was awful. And so there was a lot of red ink, And then she'd sit with me and explain all of the red ink. Okay, this is why this is wrong, and this is why this is wrong, and this is why this is wrong. And she very rarely told me anything was right. But the thing is, we had this personal connection, and it was never spoken of back then. It was just there. And she had this attitude, which again, she never said explicitly, but it was just there, of she knew that I was a writer and that she was going to help me with this. So that's how I heard it, that she was helping me. And I liked those sessions. I liked with her pointing these things out.
Yeah.
Because I knew she was helping me. I knew she was treating me seriously. And having had that experience as an adult, if I'm working with somebody who I don't have much of a relationship with, and they say something, I already know that's how it can be. So I've had practice.
Yeah.
And I can take that into my other relationships with editors and clients and everything.
Yeah. And I want to get to that trust part. The understanding that when someone's red marking your paper, someone's critiquing, someone's feedback, whatever that might be, for the betterment of your writing, it seems to me that's more important than hearing, for you, this is, and I've heard this, you hear this from athletes a lot. Athletes go to practice and they want to be coached hard. They want to be told when they're doing something. I know when I'm doing, especially like a high level athlete, they know they're good. They're in the professional league, let's say, already of their sport. They already know they're good. Yes, they love to be complimented too, but during practice, they want to get better. So they're like, tell me when I'm doing something wrong so that I can work on that. And it seems a lot like a writer, where so often people want to be told everything they're doing right. Okay, great. But with an editor, you don't get that a lot. Sometimes you'll say, like, hey, that's a great piece. Well done here, this and that. But often it's, I'm an editor. I'm helping you out with the corrections, the issues, the rewrite, the what have you. And I think you have to get to that point to where accepting that the feedback might be tough. There might be a lot of red ink. There might be a lot of questions and comments on it. And you see it the same way, it sounds like, and you're accepting of it the same way as on your side of being on the writing side. Is that right? Am I understanding that correctly? How you see it today?
Yeah.
Okay.
When I'm a writer, my editor and I are on a team.
Yeah.
And they are kind of like my coach, but they're also my teammate.
Yeah.
And, we're working on this together. And the writing is not served by them, blowing smoke at me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to work. I want to get it done.
Yeah. I see often, again, I think I could be included in this, that you're looking for praise. You're looking for compliments, fishing for compliments, right? Where the better feedback is the honesty. And like you said, teaming together. Now, going to that part, you brought it up, but I mentioned I want to go back to this, is the trust part. It takes time to build trust. So if I'm a new writer and I'm starting out, we don't have trust yet. We haven't worked together, let's say. So I have to earn it. I guess it's like anything else. You have to start somewhere. And then either the trust is built and you work well together, or there's disconnects and things aren't working. An experienced writer could say, well, I've worked with this editor for 15 years. Well, yeah, so you're going to have a lot of trust with them. Whereas the new editor, the new person you're working with, you might not have any trust. How do you get to that point of trust? And it's intuition, I suppose, right? How do you get to that point of trusting?
Well, with a new editor-writer pairing, if the writer is experienced, then it's a little easier because you can say, well, okay, I don't have that bond with this editor, but because I had the bond with my last editor, and okay, let me back up a little bit and explain what the trust does. Okay. If I never tried to write anything seriously before, and somebody told me about something that I wrote, this isn't good enough. You need to make it better. I might think, they don't like me. Because that's just where my mind would go. Or I might think, they clearly have no taste. They don't understand my genius.
Yeah.
Because there's two ways to be a newbie,
Yeah.
But if I trust somebody, I knew Elizabeth loved me. So I knew she wasn't telling me I was a bad person. So what is she telling me? That trust opens my eyes and lets me see and understand what she's actually doing. When Charles, in grad school, another major editor teacher of mine, told me, this isn't good enough, you need to do it better. Because at the time, I'd been kind of in a they don't understand my genius phase. And he said, no, this isn't good enough, you got to do it better. Okay, but I trusted him. So I knew he did understand writing. I knew he did understand me and what I was trying to do. And if he said it needed to be better, he was probably right. So that trust, that connection allowed me to be open to what he was saying and actually hear him. So now, having had those experiences, I am open to that. I don't have that knee-jerk reaction of either self-protection or dismissal anymore. So an editor I don't know tells me something, I can hear them. I can hear what they're saying. Now, somebody who hasn't had those experiences yet, it's a lot harder. And what I try and do when I edit people I don't know, who you introduce me to, I try and just act like a professional, treat them like a professional, not say anything personal either way, and hope they do get it. I believe one of the pieces I sent to you to give them does say, look, this is how it is. This isn't personal. This is what I'm doing. But it's hard. I sometimes say to new writers, when you ask for feedback, ask for the kind of feedback you want. Don't just ask for generalized feedback from everybody on a Facebook group with 45,000 people on it, or all 40,000 people are going to hop on that thread and tell you what's wrong with your writing. And that's not going to help you if you're new. So maybe consider asking for, tell me what I did right. Because when you're new, you need to hear that. It's hard. It's hard to make that jump to really see that editing isn't personal. And I have a lot of sympathy for that difficulty.
Yeah.
It's hard.
It is hard. I think most children that have gone to school in some form have written, right? So most people have written in their days. Maybe they didn't write to be published. Maybe they didn't write a book, but they wrote a paper. They wrote an essay. They wrote a paragraph. They wrote something.
Mm-hmm.
And we hear so often how kids then don't want to write. There's some point in time when kids are in school or when they come out of school, they stop creating. And maybe not as much anymore. Kids are creating YouTube videos and creating all sorts of cool stuff, right? And again, I'm making a very big generalization. This is not all children. But I think there's this, people are turned off by writing because when I turn in an essay in school, I'm getting graded. I'm getting red marks. I'm getting comments. I'm getting constant negative feedback. I'm getting stuff that just turns me off to say, don't do that because that's traumatic. And so I stopped writing. And so we were all writers at one point, and then we stopped because the feedback was so bad. Now, again, there could be great, I'm sure you've had good and bad experiences with teachers. What would you say to someone younger who chances are they should write, they want to write, but they've been so traumatized by the experience that they had in school that they just shut that part off because they're afraid, maybe based on their, whether they know it or not, subconsciously they're afraid to write anymore. What would you say to someone like that? Because I think we would both agree that the importance of writing.
Well, I'm not sure that it's important that everybody write, but it's important that everybody who wants to write writes. I would say give yourself permission to write badly. You know, one of the great things about little kids, about being a little kid, is that they don't really care whether they do it well or not. They'll scribble on something and hand it over. Look at Caroline, I made this drawing for you. And with such pride of accomplishment. And my nieces, they can see the difference between their drawings and my drawings. I'm also a visual artist. They know I have far and away more technical skill than they do. Does it matter to them? No. And it shouldn't. Because they know their kids, drawing is something that kids do, and it's fine, and it's great, and Aunt Caroline's going to love this. And they're right, I will. And if you've been separate, ideally, you develop your craft to some degree while you're still in that phase. So then when you start paying attention to whether you're good or not, you're kind of good. So that's ideal.
Yeah.
If that didn't happen for some reason, if you didn't make that jump or somebody's, pushed you down, which can happen so easily, try to go back to that, tell yourself, I want to write. I don't have to write well. It's okay to write badly. I'm just going to write badly.
Yeah.
And I'm going to enjoy writing badly. And when I'm done writing badly, maybe I'll write better later. That's fine. But right now I'm going to enjoy writing badly and have fun.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be goal directed. You could be goal directed later. Be a 5-year-old, scribble all over the place. It's fine.
Yeah.
And the only times that I run through writer's block is when I'm worried about whether I'm good enough. So sometimes I'll remind myself it's okay to write badly. And then I can put the next sentence down and go on.
Yeah. I've heard people, you talk about writer's block, when they're doing a thesis paper, a big thesis, big essay, and they have to write drafts. And a piece of advice I heard and I didn't write a thesis paper. Maybe I've shorter thesis papers, but not like the big one that you do maybe in graduate school. Write a terrible first draft. Just write the worst thing you can possibly write, because then at least you've done something. It's all like what you just said. Like, just start the process of writing. And I also think journaling, where it's for your eyes only. No one else needs to see it. To your point about just scribbling, just write. if you get in the habit of writing, you just, let's say you wake up or whatever, you go to lunch, or maybe it's before you go to, whenever someone wants to do it. And it doesn't matter how you do it. Like I asked you before, is it on a computer? Is it on a piece of paper? I don't think there is any one way to do it. It's whatever works for you will work differently for somebody else. The idea though is to just write a sentence, write an essay, write a paragraph, write a whatever. And another tip I've seen is if you just grab a book or just go online and find an article or something and pull out a sentence from any part of that book, and that's your first sentence, and then just keep writing from there. Like you take that first sentence and then the idea is to write. And like you said, write badly and just write and build that habit because it is difficult. I mean, I told you stories too, where, I mean, I had teachers that were alcoholics. I had teachers that yelled and screamed. I had teachers that were really good and they taught structure and grammar and all in the rules, like really hard, fast rules, which are good and bad. So it covered the gamut. The idea though is to just write and remember that you're not getting a grade and nobody cares what you got in 7th grade English class.
Yeah. Yeah. And not only does nobody care what grade you got 20 years ago or whatever, it's no predictor. I mean, when I was in high school, I failed both English and biology. What's happened in the past is no predictor of what's going to happen in the future for you.
Yeah. I love that. You're giving me all these quotes. I'm writing them down, thinking about them. So I'm going to ask you this question. My son had an assignment. I think it was from his creative writing class. And sometimes he'll go, oh, I can't believe I have this assignment. And then he tells me the assignment. I'm like, now I'm the father. I'm like, oh, that's a great assignment. What a great topic to write about. So the topic was, why do we write? Why write? Like, what's the purpose of writing? And so he thought about it. We talked about it. He wrote a good essay for it. Got a good grade, all that good stuff. I want to ask you that question though. Why? And it's not why do people write? It's why do you write? That's the question. Why do you write?
Why do I, Caroline, write?
Yeah.
Lots of different reasons.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my niece's birthday is coming up. I need money to buy her a present, so I have to write something. That can be part of it. But
sure.
A lot of my writing feels like taking dictation. There is something in me or outside of me, or I don't know where it comes from, but there's something that wants to be put down so that other people can read it. And that's kind of my job. I'm a cosmic stenographer or something. I write because the voices in my head tell me to. I mean, that could be taken the wrong way.
That's okay.
But there's an impulse.
Yeah.
And if I go too long without writing, it's like the pressure builds up. I have to let it out.
Absolutely. Using that, talking, because I just mentioned, like, my son had that assignment. He enjoys working out. He enjoys exercising. If he doesn't exercise for a while, he doesn't feel the same. He's like compelled to go to the gym. He's compelled to go outside and play basketball. He's compelled to do it's in his nature to do it. No different than I have to write. Like I need a pen and paper, I need my computer, and I just want to write. I mean, I often think about it as it just helps me think through things. And oftentimes when I'm thinking through it, if I can write it, maybe I'll come on the other end of it and say, okay, I don't know what I was even thinking. Or you think through it and you come to not a conclusion, but it's just maybe organize it a little bit in your head, which brings up a point of organizing your writing beforehand or just writing. Because I know you've talked about this. Like if you're really struggling with structure, a lot of times you do need some organization because the sentences have to make sense, right? The paragraphs, it all has to work together as you've talked about. And I can, in the show notes, I'll share the link because you wrote a really good article with 2 main points about structure. But I've also heard, my father wrote a book as you were involved in that process and proofing it and talking about it and introducing us to other editors for specific parts of the book or specific types of editing he needed. But when he writes, he is writing and he's going where the characters take him. There's other writers that have the whole thing built out, storyboard, the organization, the outline. So there's many different ways to go about it. When you sat down to write Ecological Memory, your books, how did you do that? Did you just write? Did you go where it took you? Was it a combination? Like, what did that look like for you?
Well, you're talking about the difference between a plotter and a pantser.
Yes.
Do you plot out the writing or do you write by the seat of your pants? And I kind of think of myself as a nonlinear pantser. The classic pantser, you start at the beginning, once upon a time, or however your book starts, and you write until you get to the end and you find out what the ending is when you get to it, right? With me, like the ending might come into my mind first, or the middle, or some sort of big picture something. And I'll write notes and I'll write outlines, but the outlines aren't something I follow. They're just me getting the idea down. And then a little bit more will come to me, and maybe I'll change the outline, or I'll write the chapters out of order. So I'll usually have at least 2 files for every given book. There's the story, which begins at the beginning and progresses. And then there's odds and ends, which is whatever scenes pop into my head. And I write them down and they're going odds and ends. And then when I get there, I go and I click and paste and plug it in and make sure it matches and fits and everything. So I'm a pantser. I just don't start at the beginning and work forward. I kind of start with big picture and work. Now, with ecological memory specifically, I remember what happened was I had been daydreaming about other ways that the world could be for a while. And I put together this fantasy version of reality. And I had this idea that, okay, so civilization collapses, and then afterwards, this better, not quite utopic, but close, better in a lot of ways, version of reality appears. Version of society appears. That's more accurate. And so I was daydreaming along with this for a while. And then I thought, this isn't quite right. Here I am daydreaming about the end of civilization like it's a good thing. There would be so much suffering if that happened, even if what happened afterwards is better. So then I thought, well, what would it actually be like to live through the end of one civilization and the beginning of another? And you have to put your life back together and you have to figure out what it all means. What would that be like? And that week, the story of ecological memory just sort of started downloading itself into my brain to answer the question. Like, okay, I hadn't been planning on writing another novel at that point. Like, it wasn't on my to-do list, but it just downloaded itself into my brain. So I wrote it down.
Yeah.
And that's how that happened.
When you talked about daydreaming, Are you going on walks? Are you sitting by the lake? Are you working? Are you making food? Like, is it just in all of these activities? When does all that take place? I mean, you hear stories about certain writers and screenplay writers and how they go through their day in writing. I've heard stories of like, I'll go sit in my pool and I'll go do this. I'll go on long walks. And you read about Hemingway and how he did it, right? So for you, when you talked about that specific time, it wasn't one time, it was over many days and many weeks, let's say, like you said, daydreaming. Like, when were you daydreaming and coming up with this in your head?
I'm fully capable of daydreaming anytime, anywhere.
Okay.
I do use music to cue specific topics. Music and I have an odd relationship. I've realized in the last couple of years that even though I enjoy music, I don't enjoy it the way most people do. I don't usually like songs I've never heard before, because what I like about music is not the music. It's the associations I have with it, and it's the ideas that it triggers. So a new song, I don't have any associations with it. It doesn't trigger anything. All it is the song. And it does nothing for me, usually. There are exceptions, but they're very rare. But when I've listened to a song a few times, sometimes it'll start reminding me of something. You know, like a train of thought that I've had, a character I've been starting to work with. Oh, yeah, that song reminds me of so-and-so. Like, I'm working on another book. It'll hopefully be out later this year. One of the characters in it, his name is Luke. Springsteen's Dancing in the Dark reminded me of Luke somehow. So, okay. So let's pay attention to this. what's Luke like? So I would listen to Dancing in the Dark over and over. And I had to wait till my husband was out of the house before I did it because it would drive him nuts. Like several times a day, every day for months, I would be there dancing in the dark, communing with Luke, figuring out what kind of person he is, what kind of life he's led, what his challenges are. If the song were about him, what would the different verses be referring to in his life? And so then I wrote the story about Luke based on that song and a couple of other things. And I was using the song to access the particular part of my mind that was figuring out who Luke was.
Yeah.
And I've used other songs like that too.
Yeah. I love it. That's fascinating. I was just going to ask you, like, what type of music? And then you have a specific story by a specific artist about a specific song in Bruce Springsteen. Do you read a lot? Obviously, you write a lot. You edit a lot. Do you also read?
Yeah. I don't read quite as much as I did when I was a kid and an adolescent.
Mm-hmm.
When I was an older child and a teenager, I read a lot of fiction. And that's important for a fiction writer to read a lot of fiction, because then you know what's possible. I sometimes see people in online writers groups asking, can I do this? Can I do that? I say, well, if you read more books, you'll know that other people have done that. And then you'd know. As an adult, I'm busy with this, that, and I'm busy writing.
Right.
So I read less than I used to, but I still do read. A lot of it's nonfiction, though. I read a lot of science. I read some things about politics and so on. I'm trying to, there are topics I enjoy. That's part of it. I'm a major science geek, but I want to know about the world so I can write about it too. It's all just grist for the mill.
Yeah.
And then when I do read fiction, I don't just read it because I enjoy it. I want to know how the author's doing it. How did you get this effect? How does this work? Why is this so effective? Oh, I don't like this. What's wrong with it? What did the author... I can get a lot out of reading badly written books. What's wrong with this?
Yeah.
How do I not do this?
No, that's right. I've gotten a lot since my dad wrote his book. I read it and reread it. So I was getting more into fiction. So I started reading a lot of nonfiction. So I started reading more fiction. And I found in fiction books, there's a lot of nonfiction inside of it, like things that we can learn or things that are interesting, and it was a story to get to that point. And maybe it was a line that one of the characters said. And in a way, if you just took that line out and you put it in a nonfiction book, it would fit right there. If it was talking about, you name it, could have been science, it could have been relationships and love, and who knows. But so you're right. I think, and I would say this to our kids, is read a lot, write a lot. Read whatever you want to read, write about whatever you want to write about. If you do that, and then it'll evolve from there. Read what you love until you love to read. I've heard that line. And I think that is so true. It could be magazines. It could be whatever.
Yeah, that part is so important. I used to know a man who thought he was stupid. And he wasn't. I don't think that he was, the world's smartest human being or anything. He was at least average, possibly smarter than average. And he thought he was stupid. And one of the reasons he thought he was stupid was that he didn't like reading classic literature. At some point in his childhood or adolescence, somebody had told him, smart people like these books. And he didn't. So he thought, I don't like reading, I must be dumb. So I told him, if you weren't attracted to a woman just because somebody else was attracted to her, would you think you didn't like women because he liked women?
Yeah.
No, you're attracted to who you're attracted to. Books are the same way. You like reading what you like reading. And classics become classics for a reason. A lot of people like reading them. It's not a bad idea to read classics. They're basically recommended by hundreds of thousands of people over the course of history. But if you don't like them, you don't like them. Read something else that you do like.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love this. That's exactly right. And to get to the point to write a book about the fall of civilization for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
You had these people asking about, can I do this? Is this possible? Like you said, there's all the ideas have come up with. Then there's just versions of it. It's almost like how you write. Like you write in a hybrid way of a plotter versus a pantser, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you're on one end of it, and then you have a hybrid approach to it. Just like all the ideas that have come up, they've all been generated already. So now we're just taking hybrid approaches maybe to all these different ideas, whether obviously in our writing and our creative phase. No different than the individual that you just talked about. What are the nuances? What are the things that you like? And then you start going down that path, and then you maneuver around, and maybe one day he'll go read a classic and he'll be reading Moby Dick for all we know, because he ended up back there somehow through some sort of recommendation. And it's just, there's so many ways to get to wherever we are going and to where the characters are going. And then to bring it back to that point of the fall of civilization, which is ecological memory. And you've discussed it. It's right there in front. You go to Amazon, you see it, and you're like, okay, that's something big. And we've, obviously there's a lot of books and movies that talk about these things. When was it to you to say, and you talked about it a little bit, I guess, too, where like it would be interesting to live at a time or to like think about what a character would have to go through to get to that point, but then take it further back to even want to broach that subject. What made you want in this novel to just end civilization?
Civilization bugs me.
Yeah. Okay.
This pollution and crime and climate change and political weirdness and people being jerks to each other and all kinds of things, and having a daydream about how it could just all be better somehow helped. And it still helps.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's unusual. A lot of post-apocalyptic stories, they're sort of billed as dystopias. And in the sort of obvious way, they're not places that most of us would want to live. But in a way, they are. I mean, like Mad Max, for example, which actually is mentioned in Ecological Memory. At one point, one of the characters asks, so why aren't we living in Mad Max world? Why didn't that happen? And the other character says, well, I guess people just don't want to live there. So that's not what we built when we rebuilt civilization. But you watch those movies. I've seen one of them. I haven't seen all of them. But you watch those movies and this sere desert landscape and people riding across the desert in these giant automobiles and playing weird music, and there's guns and motorcycles and all. A lot of people think that's really cool. And you might not want that to come true for real, but there are things about it that you want.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be a hero. You want to know unambiguously that what you do matters. You want excitement. And that's why those movies are enjoyable. They're not really movies and books and whatever about how terrible the world is. They're movies and books about the things that we want to have in our lives and don't. And for some reason, it's easier for a lot of people to understand having that in this dystopic setting, which I don't really understand, but it seems to be very common. And my Ecological Memory is not dystopic. People tend to assume that it is because it is post-apocalyptic, but it's not dystopic. I mean, there's all sorts of things going right, but it is easier for me I can be cynical too. It's easier for me to imagine a better world if I imagine something horrible happening first. This weird psychological thing that a lot of us have. And it worries me. What's it say about our culture that it's hard to imagine something just being good, better? No complication, no drawback, just better. Why is that so hard? I don't know.
Yeah. It seems like why you write, and you don't have to say it's this, it's almost a form of therapy. It is a form of thinking through these things and saying, I enjoy this process of thinking about these things. It helps me.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this too. Even if it's one person on the other and it helps them, there is someone else who's thinking these things, and maybe they don't know it yet until they read the book. it helps them as well. And a book or a piece of art, a song, yeah, it would be cool. Like you said, like you want to buy your niece, nephew, right?
Niece.
You want to buy the things. You want to buy yourself things. You want to pay the bills. It's okay to make money off of it.
Yeah.
So that would be great to be a bestseller and to sell millions of copies of your book, and how awesome that would be. But there's more to it than that. And I think you're helping yourself. And in the process, there is someone out there, and it's more than just one person. It's always more than, it's usually a lot of people, that it's going to help them as well, whether they know it or not. And you thinking through this and imagining what it would be like, closing your eyes and writing about it, talking about it, and coming on here and sharing this, it helps them out. Because maybe they have a different thought of what they need to think about to make it better for them. And maybe it's nothing to do with the fall of civilization. Who knows, right? It could be something to do with their work or their house or their daily commute. People are cutting in and out of traffic and cutting them off like we deal with here. That could drive someone crazy. And so how do you deal with that? Well, you can journal it, you can write about it, you could read books, you could have conversations with people like yourself. And that helps me out. That's why I do this. I mean, there's all notes that I have and whatnot. When I have these conversations, I know that you're coming on here and you're spending your time and we're having this conversation. It helps me out. And I know it could help other people out when I help them write, create. It could be my children. I always think about that. It's like, if I'm talking to someone that this could someday help my kids or someone else around it, then this is return on that. And I've talked a lot about what's the return on a podcast or what's the return on writing a book. And you talk to a lot of authors, they're like, that's not the business to get into. If you want to make a lot of money, don't go write a novel.
Right.
There's just more to it than that, though.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to it.
There is a great Dar Williams song, if you like Dar Williams. And I mean, if you don't, it's still a great song. It's called Are You Out There? And what the song is basically about is she's talking to a pair of DJs in this song. I assume these are their real names, Jimmy Olsen and Johnny Memphis. And apparently when she was a teenager, she would listen to them and that helped her get through. So she's writing this song to let them know, I was that kid, listening to the radio under the covers or whatever, and you helped me get through it. And I want you to know you were important to me. I was listening to you. And it's just really powerful song. And there are things like that. Like with me, it's not DJs. With me, it's like David Attenborough or, some other scientist or certain writers. Like, hey, Ursula K. Le Guin, who died a couple of years ago, Margaret Wander Bonanno, one of her books is just like, wow, this right here is what's going on with me as a teenager before I even knew. And it's important to me thinking about maybe I can do that for somebody else.
Yeah.
And maybe one of my heroes will read one of my books. Maybe David Attenborough will read one of my novels.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, the two people I dedicated the book to, Charles Curtin and Tom Wessels, you want to check out their books, by the way. Charles writes serious science. Tom's a little bit more accessible for non-science geeks. But anyway, you want to check out their work. I didn't encounter them until I was an adult. But, they're heroes of mine. They're also friends of mine. And so I dedicated the book to them. And I sent them both copies. And I didn't tell them I was going to do that because I didn't want them to say no. I just, surprise, here you go. Because they both really liked it. My heroes like my writing.
Yeah.
I can die happy now. I mean, it's just amazing.
Yeah. Gives you a lot of joy.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you take this review culture we live in? Maybe this is why we need to end civilization, because everything's reviewed. Like everything from obviously the obvious, the restaurants, the hotels, the products we buy on Amazon, the books, the whatever, you name it. And oftentimes these reviews are gamed. I mean, I can tell you, to become I mentioned bestseller, there's games you play to become a bestseller, as you probably know. there are real reviews. Inside of all that, there are the real reviews. We talked at the very beginning of this, bring it down to the other end. It's like we talked about editors and feedback and critique. How have you taken this review culture when you write a book and put it on Amazon, and all of a sudden people are going to come on there, whether it's one person or a lot of people, they're typing away and they're leaving their review. How have you received that?
I wish they would.
Yeah.
I've gotten a couple of reviews from people I don't actually know. Most of them are from people I know. Now, you're not supposed to do that. Amazon doesn't want people who know the author leaving reviews. But the people I ask for reviews are people who I trust to be honest. Now, I don't want them to put up a bad review. If they didn't like it, I want them to just not say anything. But they're not going to say they like it if they don't like it. And that's important to me, and I trust that. But I wish I got more reviews from strangers, even not quite stellar reviews.
Mm-hmm.
When I go to buy something, if I look at reviews, which I don't usually, I don't shop online much, but if I'm going to look at reviews, if something has like 15 5-star reviews and 2 1-star reviews, I know what that means.
Yeah.
If there's more of a spread, if there are 3 and 4-star reviews and a couple of 5s,
yeah,
that tells me, oh, okay, this is real. Those 4-star reviews, those are real. Those are people who read this book and they liked it, but there's a little bit of a problem and they don't know the author, so they're perfectly comfortable saying stuff. Okay, this is going to be a good book.
Right.
Read my book and leave 4-star reviews, people. I need more reviews.
Yeah. Well, it's a common thing. It's not just you, right? And I don't know the numbers, but the 80-20 rule, but the book is even more. It's like the number of books is sold by the top 1% or less. They sell all the books. And it just goes on from there of like, it's a handful. And I think you're right that we need more people out there leaving reviews. It's just hard. So even if you had a lot of readers, a lot of times, like I asked an author, and they said, I didn't have a lot of reviews. I'm like, when's the last time you left a review for a product you bought? And they said, never. So it's an expectation we all have that someone's going to leave a review. And that's the other thing to say. So if I'm going to look for a book and this book doesn't have reviews, does that make it not a good book? Like maybe they have 2 reviews. Maybe it's 2 5-star reviews, or maybe it's a 1 and a 5. No, not necessarily. I think The Alchemist was not a well-known book. Like it just sat there for all those years. And then all of a sudden it became a classic at some point. And I don't know the timeline of how all that happened. But again, when no one was reading it, was it a bad book? No, it's the same book that it always was. No words were changed. Cover might have changed. I don't know. But it's definitely a difficult thing for artists. And it's not just in writing. I mean, any type of creator. Like there's songs out there that have 2,000 streams on Spotify. To make it a bad song, it hasn't hit yet somehow. And how that happens and when that takes place, like when does something go viral? I don't know. It's not easy.
It's not. I write reviews for other books. I don't review every book I've read. And I'm more likely to write reviews for books that don't have a lot of reviews already.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do write reviews for books. Be the change.
Yeah.
Be the change you want to see in the world. But I'm not so much worried about what individual buyers are going to think from seeing how many reviews I have or how many I don't. The thing is the Amazon algorithm.
Yeah.
You need 50 reviews before they'll start showing your book to more people.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's an absolute cutoff. I think the more reviews you have, the better, so having 16 reviews is better than having none. But it's about attracting the attention of algorithms.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is why I tell people, you don't have to worry that your review is well written. You can literally, I liked it, a couple of stars.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I think if anyone's writing or wants to read more, leave reviews. Go read Ecological Memory. Leave a review. Whatever.
Yes,
and I think it is important, please, to leave the review that you feel comfortable leaving. And honesty helps. You've written another book, To Give a Rose. That's 2
Yep.
books. You're working on a 3rd book. I think that also makes a
Yes.
difference. I think authors who someone writes 1 book, what an amazing accomplishment. You don't have to write anything more. But to the point of to have more books sold and be like, okay, wow, I can see this. Or if it's a series, right? Something along those lines, it helps, right? It's more of it's just more. And people are looking for that. So
Yeah.
your books can be bought on Amazon. I'm sure other places as well. I was looking at, it looks like it's on maybe Audible or Barnes and Noble, Walmart,
Target.
Yeah. So
my publisher has a website and it's on there.
yeah.
I am the only Caroline Ailanthus in the world. I'm the only person who has that particular name, at least as far as Google knows about. Yeah, I've Googled myself. I'm the only one who comes up.
Yeah, sure.
That makes me really easy to Google. So, I heard this person on this podcast and she's talking about this book that sounded interesting. What was the title? I'm like, nah, I don't remember.
Yeah.
Caroline Ailanthus. Just
yeah. Ailanthus. So there you go. They could type it in as I just said that out loud. So I appreciate all this. Like I said before, I love your references, your stories that you pull out. It's very specific. It's clear that and I think writing does that. I think writing allows you to speak more clearly on certain topics, especially the topics that you write about.
Mm-hmm.
You take your time with it. You're very thoughtful and it's super helpful. And I enjoy the time we spend together talking, but also writing. And we've probably spent more time writing via email and on documents than we have over the phone, but we've done that as well. And I definitely appreciate it. And I enjoy these conversations a great bit. And thank you. If there's anything else that you want to share or add about your books or anything else, please, the floor is yours.
Oh, I don't know. See, I am a writer and I think better when I'm writing. So it's like, okay, what do you want to talk about? I don't know. My mind just went blank.
I don't like open-ended questions. I only say that. And, sometimes it's just, there's something out there that someone had said, I wish I got to talk about this thing. And that's sometimes why I'll open it up. But it is hard. And here's the thing I'll say. You had introduced us to an editor, Austin. And one of the first things he said to us and to my father specifically is there are no rules. There are no rules in writing. I mean, there's certain rules, right? There's obviously, but maybe there's not. Like maybe you can write a book that's completely grammatically incorrect, I suppose. I don't know. I don't think anyone would publish it, but there are no rules to any of this. There's no rules to podcasting. There's no rules to the answer. I've always said, I can ask you a question and you can answer it however you want to answer it. You can answer it completely different questions. Politicians do it all the time. Go watch an interview after a sporting event and the coach is upset that they lost and they ask a question and the coach just talks about something that has nothing to do with the question that was just asked. I think that's cool. I think it's like, just, you can say whatever or not answer it. Next question, not interested in that one. There are no rules to all of this stuff.
Well, there are and there aren't. There are no rules in the sense of if you punctuate something wrong, your 8th grade English teacher is not going to jump out of the bushes and arrest you.
Mine might.
That's not the way it works.
Yeah.
I wish Elizabeth could jump out of the bushes, not to arrest me, but,
right.
I wish she could show up again. But, there are no rules in the sense of you are compelled to obey this. There are rules of thumb. You do this, that's probably going to happen. You do this, it's going to work this way. You want that to happen, here's what if you wrote an entire novel without any periods, well, okay, you could self-publish a novel like that. Probably couldn't trad publish it, but you could self-publish it. Okay. But hardly anybody would read it because it would be exhausting to read. Unless you're James Joyce or something like that. And, there are consequences.
Yeah.
And you build your relationship with the reader by paying attention to those consequences, those relationships, those rules of thumb. But, you can't write anything you want and have any reaction that you want to it. But you can write anything you want.
Yeah.
You have mentioned ecological memory a couple of times. Do you want me to talk about it specifically? Do you want me to summarize it?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's finish this off with you giving a summary of ecological memory. I think that'd be a good way to close it out.
So it is set 20 years after the end of civilization. By weird coincidence, I published it in 2019. By weird coincidence, the thing that ends civilization is a pandemic in the story. And then like a couple of months later, we had a pandemic, which was freaky. But anyway, pandemic crashes civilization and takes it back to really survival basics. And then gradually people build back, and they build back, it's different. Like there's no fossil fuel use anymore. There are a lot of differences relating to that. The way education works is different. It's just really different. This is 20 years later, and two main characters. Elsie she's 26, so she was a child when the collapse happened. She's a police officer, but she's retraining to be an environmental educator. Her problem is she doesn't remember where her childhood home was. She survived the pandemic somehow. She was with her father, who has since died, and she doesn't know where that was. All she has is these fragmentary, like flashback type memories of a forest that she played in. So when she sees one of these tree species that she hasn't seen since she was little, oh yeah, I remember that tree that's like this. This is what it was there. So she's slowly building up this picture of this forest. Doesn't know where it was. You can imagine how hard that would be to have this childhood home that's important to you. And you can't go back because you don't know where it was. She is apprenticed, basically, to an ecologist named Andy. And he, being an ecologist, when he finds out about this forest that she sort of remembers, he's like, okay, let's see if you can remember. The same kind of forest doesn't grow everywhere. Let's figure out where that kind of forest grows. We can find your home that way. So that's what they do. And, they're traveling through New England and trying to figure out where this forest was. He's older, so he was an adult when the collapse happened. And he lost his wife and children. And so he has these traumatic memories from this. And he's telling her about the past, which, what the old world was like, how the collapse happened, all of this. And these memories start coming up for him, and he starts to lose it. On one level, the book is a scientific detective story. Where was this forest? Let's put together the clues, figure out the puzzle. Where is this forest? And on another level, it's this post-apocalyptic road trip through New England and mountains and rivers and all of this stuff. But it's also the story about these two people who bear complementary wounds. She's lost her past, and in a way, he's lost his future. He lost his children. And can they help each other? Can they help each other to heal? So that's what it is. And I should point out that the term ecological memory is kind of a pun. There's the obvious meaning that I expect most readers will get. Oh, remembering ecology. So she remembers the forest. That's remembering ecology, right? But it's also a technical term. There's a lot of science in the book about scientists. Ecological memory is the capacity of a living system to return to an earlier state following disturbance. So if there's a forest and it's logged, say, clear cut, new forest grows up. Is the forest that grows up similar to the forest that was cut? If it is, then in a way, the land remembered itself. Or if it's close and the land remembered parts of itself. So that's ecological memory, is how well you can put yourself back together after everything falls apart. And that's what the characters are doing. That's what society's doing. That's what the planet is doing. It's how well can you put yourself together after everything falls apart? That's kind of the heart of the book for me.
In case you haven't noticed, we love podcasts. In fact, we love building podcasts, everything from development to production. Because of all that, we're building a one-of-a-kind podcast network. If you have a podcast or looking to launch a new podcast, then we should talk. You can message me on Twitter at Eric_Kaz or hit us up any way that works for you. Let's talk about your podcast joining this one-of-a-kind podcast network.